The stadium plunged into absolute darkness. 50,000 voices fell silent. Prince stood, frozen center stage, his purple cloud guitar suddenly as dead as the night around him. The massive LED screens went black. The sound system died mid-note during Purple Rain. For the first time in his career, technology had abandoned the man who'd mastered it. What happened next would prove that true genius doesn't need electricity. It creates its own lightning. September 15th, 1993. London's Wembley Stadium, the most technically advanced concert venue in Europe, had just become a graveyard of dead electronics. In the darkness, 50,000 people waited to see if Prince would become a legend or a cautionary tale. He had 30 seconds before they started leaving. What he chose to do with those seconds would change everything anyone thought they knew about live performance. 3 hours earlier, Prince had stood in his dressing room, staring at the wall of monitors showing the technical setup. 47 separate electronic systems, digital effects processors worth more than most people's houses, a computer network that controlled every light, every sound, every visual effect in his show. His manager, Karen Lee, had never seen him this nervous before a show. "Prince, you've done this 1,000 times. What's different tonight?" He turned from the monitors, his eyes carrying a weight she'd never seen. "Tonight feels like a test, like everything I've built is about to be judged." The truth was simpler and more terrifying. Prince had become dependent on technology in ways that scared him. Every album since 1987 had required more computers, more digital effects, more electronic layers. His live shows had evolved into technological symphonies where he conducted machines as much as musicians. But late at night, alone in Paisley Park, a question haunted him. What would happen if all the technology disappeared? Would there be anything left of him underneath? His father's words echoed from 30 years ago. "Son, don't let the tools become more important than the talent. When the power goes out, what can you do with just your hands?" Prince had dismissed those words as old-school thinking. Tonight, he was about to discover they were prophecy. Minneapolis, 1962. 7-year-old Prince sat at a broken piano in his father John Nelson's basement. The power had gone out during a thunderstorm, and the electronic piano his father had bought him wouldn't work. Little Prince was crying, frustrated that he couldn't practice. "Dad, I can't play anything. The piano's dead." His father sat beside him at the old acoustic upright piano they'd inherited from Prince's grandmother. The keys were yellow, some were chipped, and it hadn't been tuned in years. But when John Nelson's fingers touched those keys, the basement filled with music more beautiful than anything that came from the electric piano. "Listen, son, this piano doesn't need electricity. It doesn't need computers. It only needs your hands and your heart. Promise me something. Learn to make music that doesn't need machines. Because machines can fail you. Your soul never will." Prince had nodded, but even then, he was fascinated by the electric piano. The sounds it could make, the effects, the possibilities. Over the years, as he mastered instrument after instrument, he gravitated toward anything that plugged into a wall. Synthesizers, electric guitars, digital recorders. Each new technology opened doors he couldn't resist walking through. By 1985, he could create entire albums alone in his studio, layering digital tracks until they sounded like full orchestras. Critics called him a one-man musical revolution, but the further he traveled into electronic territories, the further he moved from his father's acoustic wisdom. Until tonight, when everything changed. Wembley Stadium's power grid was a marvel of British engineering. Triple redundancy systems, backup generators, fail-safes for the fail-safes. The venue had never experienced a complete power failure during a show, ever. But September 15th, 1993, wasn't like other nights. At 9:47 p.m., exactly 23 minutes into Prince's set, a combination of factors created the perfect storm. A transformer explosion 3 miles away, a computer virus affecting the backup generator controls, and pure coincidence, the exact moment when Prince's show was drawing maximum power for the Purple Rain light display. The failure was instant and complete. Every electrical system in Wembley Stadium died simultaneously. Emergency lighting failed. Even the backup radio systems went dark. 50,000 people sat in darkness so complete that some couldn't see their own hands. Prince felt it happen in slow motion. His guitar went silent mid-solo. The drums stopped. The keyboards died. The massive video screens that had been showing close-ups of his performance went black. For 15 seconds, the only sound in Wembley Stadium was 50,000 people breathing. Then the murmuring started. Confused voices asking what was happening. Cell phones lighting up like fireflies as people tried to understand. Security guards with flashlights appearing at the edges of the stadium. And in the center of it all, Prince standing alone on a stage that had become just a platform in the dark. Steve Martin, Wembley's head of security, appeared at the edge of the stage with a flashlight. "Prince, we need to evacuate. Complete power failure. Could be hours before we get it back." Prince didn't move. In the darkness, his mind was racing through possibilities. Cancel the show, disappoint 50,000 people, deal with insurance claims, reschedule, face the media talking about technical failures. The logical choice was obvious, but something else was pulling at him. His father's voice, the memory of that acoustic piano in the basement, the promise he'd made 30 years ago and had spent his entire career running from. "No," Prince said quietly. "Get me an acoustic guitar." "What?" "You heard me. Someone in this stadium has an acoustic guitar. Find it. Bring it to me." Steve Martin stared at him. "Prince, there's no power, no amplification, no sound system. Even if you had a guitar, 50,000 people couldn't hear you." Prince smiled for the first time all evening. "Watch me." Inside, his heart hammered against his ribs. This was insane. His entire career had been built on sonic perfection, on controlling every electronic element. Now he was about to strip away everything that made him Prince and stand naked before 50,000 people with nothing but a borrowed guitar in his voice. But somehow in this moment of technological failure, he felt more alive than he had in years. By now the crowd was getting restless. Some people in the upper sections were starting to leave. The darkness was disorienting, and without any word from the stage, many assumed the show was over. But others remained, holding up cell phones and lighters, creating a sea of tiny lights in the blackness. Security found what they were looking for. Tommy Harrison, age 19, had brought his Martin acoustic guitar to the show, hoping maybe to get it signed if he hung around the stage door afterward. 5 minutes later, that guitar was in Prince's hands. Prince walked to the absolute center of the stage. No microphone, no amplification, no effects. Just him and a borrowed acoustic guitar in front of 50,000 people in the dark. Most of the crowd couldn't even see him clearly, but they could hear him breathe. He started with a single note. G major, let it ring out into the darkness. Sustained, clear, carrying further than physics said it should in a space that size. The wood of the guitar felt foreign in his hands after years of sleek electric instruments. But as his fingers found the frets, muscle memory from childhood piano lessons awakened. Then another note, and another. Building a chord progression that somehow seemed to fill the entire stadium. The crowd fell silent. Not the restless silence of confusion, but the focused silence of people realizing they were about to witness something extraordinary. In the VIP section, music journalists who'd come to review another Prince spectacle found themselves holding their breath, witnessing the birth of something unprecedented. Prince began to sing, no microphone, just his voice, pitched perfectly to carry in the acoustic space. Purple Rain transformed completely. Stripped of its electronic orchestration, it became something older, deeper, more fundamental. A prayer rather than a performance. His voice carried, not just to the front rows, but impossibly, to people hundreds of yards away. Some acoustic phenomenon unique to Wembley's architecture, or maybe just the magic that happens when 50,000 people listen to one person with complete attention. As he sang, something remarkable began to happen. People in the crowd started joining in, quietly at first, then more boldly. Without any prompting, without any electronic cues, 50,000 voices began to harmonize with Prince's acoustic guitar and raw vocals. The effect was otherworldly. This wasn't a rock concert anymore. It was a tribal gathering, a communal experience that reached back to humanity's earliest musical traditions. Before electricity, before amplification, before any technology except the human voice and wooden instruments. Prince felt tears streaming down his face as he played. For the first time in decades, he wasn't performing for the crowd. He was performing with them. Each voice that joined his created a layer of harmony he'd never achieved with any synthesizer. This was the sound his soul had been searching for through all those years of electronic exploration. What started as crisis became resurrection. Prince discovered something he'd forgotten in all his years of electronic mastery: the pure connection between artist and audience. No screens, no effects, no digital mediation, just music in its most elemental form. He played for 45 minutes, songs from his entire catalog, rearranged for acoustic guitar and voice. When Doves Cry became a haunting ballad, Kiss turned into a Delta blues lament, Let's Go Crazy transformed into a gospel sing-along that had 50,000 people clapping in perfect rhythm without any electronic metronome to guide them. The cell phone lights multiplied. What had started as confused illumination became deliberate participation. People held up their phones not to record, but to create light. The stadium filled with a constellation of tiny stars, each one held by someone who was no longer just watching, but participating in something they'd never experienced before. Prince had become what his father had always told him he could be: a musician who needed nothing but his hands and his heart. Around 10:45 p.m., 48 minutes after the power failure, the electricity flickered back on. Stage lights blazed to life. The sound system crackled back to existence. The massive video screens reboot with electronic fanfare. Prince stopped playing. The crowd fell silent, wondering if he would return to his original set list, plug in his electric guitar, and resume the high-tech spectacle they'd paid to see. Instead, he did something that would be talked about for decades. He unplugged every piece of electronic equipment on stage, one by one: keyboards, electric guitars, digital effects processors, everything that required electricity to function. His band watched in amazement as their leader systematically disconnected the technological foundation of their performance. "Tonight," Prince said, his voice now amplified through the restored sound system, "you taught me something my father tried to tell me 30 years ago. Music doesn't come from machines. It comes from the connection between human beings. Everything else is just decoration." He picked up the acoustic guitar again. "Let's finish this the way we started it, together." The Wembley acoustic set became legendary. Bootleg recordings circulated for years, though none captured the full experience of being there in the darkness, part of that communion of 50,000 voices. Music critics called it the most important performance of Prince's career, the night he rediscovered his core as an artist. Rolling Stone wrote, "In 45 minutes of darkness, Prince found light he'd been searching for his entire career." But the real impact was on Prince himself. From that night forward, every concert included an acoustic segment. His albums began featuring stripped-down tracks alongside the electronic compositions. He installed a simple piano and acoustic guitar in every room of Paisley Park, so he could make music even when the power went out. Tommy Harrison, the 19-year-old whose guitar saved the show, received a call 3 days later. Prince wanted to buy the guitar for $50,000. Tommy declined, but accepted Prince's invitation to visit Paisley Park, where they played acoustic music together for hours. Prince's father, John Nelson, watched a bootleg video of the Wembley performance 6 months later. He called his son afterward, something he rarely did. "You kept your promise," he said simply. "I'm proud of you." The acoustic Martin guitar that Prince played that night was eventually donated to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where it sits with a plaque reading, "The night the power went out and the music turned on." Years later, sound engineers would study bootleg recordings of that night, trying to understand how Prince's unamplified voice carried so clearly to every corner of Wembley Stadium. Some attributed it to perfect acoustics, others to the absolute silence of the crowd. Prince himself believed it was something simpler. When you sing from your soul, the universe amplifies it for you. But perhaps the most lasting impact was philosophical. Prince had discovered that his greatest strength wasn't his mastery of technology, but his ability to connect with people through pure musical expression. The machines had made him powerful, but that night in the darkness, he learned they'd also made him distant. The question he'd been afraid to answer, what would be left if the technology disappeared, had been answered definitively. Everything. Everything that mattered was still there, waiting in the darkness, ready to shine. When was the last time you discovered that your greatest strength wasn't what you thought it was? That sometimes losing everything you depend on reveals everything you truly are? What would remain of your talents if all your tools disappeared tomorrow?